Bună seara, doamnelor și domnilor, bine ați venit. Urmează declarații.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome.
Excelența sa, doamna Luminița Odobescu.
We have now the press statements of the Romanian and Ukrainian foreign ministers. Your Excellencies, you have the floor. Good evening. It was a real joy to welcome today Mrs. Olha Stefanishyna, Deputy Prime Minister for European and Euro-Atlantic Integration of Ukraine. Your Excellency, Deputy Prime Minister, dear Olga, thank you for the applied and frequent dialogue that we had during this time that was very intense for the bilateral relations between Romania and Ukraine. We had a round of political and diplomatic consultations that were applied with a complex agenda. This proves the continuing dynamics of the bilateral dialogue between Romania and Ukraine, as well as the great diversity of sectoral fields of collaborations between the two countries. Today we had an in-depth exchange of opinions in preparing the next reunion of the European Council next week, 14th, 15th of December in Brussels. In this context, I would like to reiterate the clear support of Romania for announcing the opening of the accession negotiations to the EU with Ukraine and with the Republic of Moldova at the European Council in December. It is the natural step that recognizes the efforts of Ukraine and of Moldova. As we've shown in today's discussions, Romania's position is grounded on the individual merits of the candidate countries, which is the defining element of the enlargement policy of the EU. I underlined and welcomed the reforms already implemented by Ukraine in the perspective of opening the accession negotiations. We talk about an administrative effort that is convincing and impressive through its dimension. And it's even more notable the fact that this effort was taken in very difficult conditions of the war of aggression of the Russian Federation against Ukraine. We all make efforts so that at the end of the European Council next week, we will have the decisions that Ukraine and Moldova and Romania are waiting for. I've also mentioned that it is important to continue implementing all the reforms required by the European Commission, including the legislation about the protection of the people belonging to national minorities in Ukraine. In this context, I outlined the fact that the draft law proposed by the authorities in Kyiv for the amendment of the relevant legislation is a positive step forward and a welcomed initiative. I ensure that the Romanian side will continue to have a transparent and constructive approach in this sense. The protection of the rights of the people belonging to national minorities is also important for an Ukrainian state that is inclusive, democratic and European, and we welcome the efforts of the Ukrainian government in this sense. Regarding the Euro-Atlantic agenda of Ukraine, I outlined the importance of the implementation of the decision of the Vilnius NATO summit. We agreed that the decisions here represented a historical moment in the political and practical approach, getting closer to NATO by the Ukraine. We underlined the importance of the declaration of the NATO-Ukraine Council that reiterates the support for of the allies for Ukraine. We discussed about the preparation of the NATO summit in Washington next year. The thorough preparation of this summit is essential in order to continue the deepening process of the relation between the alliance and Ukraine. Also, we've shown that Romania will continue to support all the actions of the international communities in order to hold liable all those that are guilty of crimes in Ukraine and against Ukraine, including by creating a court for the crime of aggression. We agreed that peace in Ukraine cannot be imagined in the absence of an act of justice and the accountability of those guilty of the atrocious crimes committed against the civilians and the Ukrainian people. I underline the fact that Romania supports the peace formula proposed by President Zelensky as the only proposal regarding peace in Ukraine, which starts from a fundamental cause of this war, the decision of the Russian Federation to launch an illegal war of aggression against Ukraine. Romania will continue to participate to the detailing and deepening process of the peace formula. In this context, I underline the importance of engaging in a more concrete and applied manner the states in the Global South, and I underline that the responsibility of this war of aggression belongs to the Russian Federation. Mrs. Deputy Prime Minister, bilaterally, we had an exchange of opinions about the next steps for the initiation of the process of taking the bilateral relations between Romania and Ukraine to the level of a strategic partnership, according to the mandate established by the declaration signed by President Iohannis and President Zelensky in October 2023. I affirmed the openness of the Romanian side to deepen the sectoral dialogue between the authorities and institutions in Romania and Ukraine. We showed that Romanians' commitment to increase the transit capacity for grains from Ukraine remains firm, according to those agreed by the Prime Minister Ciolacu and Prime Minister Shimal in Bucharest in August 2023. In this sense, we underlined the importance of continuing the dialogue that we have with the USA, the European Commission, and the Republic of Moldova. I expressed our appreciation for the decision of the government in Kyiv in terms of the so-called Moldovan language. In concrete terms, I conveyed to the Deputy Prime Minister our appreciation and our thanks for her personal proactive role in this sense. It's important to fully implement this decision at all levels, central, regional, and local, and in all regions in Ukraine. The Romanian side will continue to follow this process, and we are confident in waiting for a solution of any inadvertencies. Especially, we will welcome the prompt reaction of the authorities in Kyiv in solving the aspects about the editing of the manuals for the Romanian language in the areas of Ukraine where there is a Romanian community. At the end, we agreed with the Deputy Prime Minister that the bilateral relations contribute fundamentally and concretely to the regional security. We will continue to work in the same spirit in 2024, but also on the long run. By starting the process of taking the bilateral relations to the level of a strategic partnership, Romania and Ukraine commit jointly to act in order to deepen even more the bilateral relations, including by identifying and implementing sectoral projects of common interest to the benefit of the two countries and to the benefit of the Romanian and Ukrainian citizen, and lastly, to the benefit of the region and of the European Union. Thank you once again for your presence here in Bucharest. Deputy Prime Minister, you have the floor.
Thank you, ministers. Thank you, Luminița. It's a great pleasure for me to be here today and to have a long and very substantial discussion with you. I know that you have a special place in your heart, not only for Ukraine, but for Ukraine's accession bid to European Union, because you've been one of those people who brought your country to become a member of European Union, and this brings a lot of emotion at the head of the decisions that we are waiting for to be taken on the 15th of December at the meeting of the EU leaders. But of course, prior to that, we have discussed a long range of the bilateral issues we have in our agenda. Indeed, the strategic character of the relations between Ukraine and Moldova, this is a demand of time, but also a moment of time which is extremely important, where while Ukraine has shown its resilience and resolve to deter the world against Russian aggression, we are withstanding the war, but we are also able to develop and scale up our efforts to join the European Union, to become the player on the EU internal market. We face a lot of challenges, but these are all also an opportunities, and I'm really grateful that the wide range of bilateral elements of the discussion we have serving to this purpose. We are grateful to the efforts Romania has been taken to enforce the transit of the different types of products to European Union and to the world. We are committed to address all the individual challenges which are occurring throughout this process by the instruments of bilateral dialogue, and take all the necessary measures needed on our side to secure the Romanian market and to survive ourselves. So far, we have been successful in this process, and I'm gladly confirmed the positive outcomes of yesterday's visit of our Vice Prime Minister for Infrastructure Kubrakov and Minister of Agricultural Policy Solsky to meet with your colleagues and the colleagues from the Commission. So this dialogue is permanent, and I think that the strategic character of our relations also underlines the role of our countries as the future members of European Union. We have been discussing also in details the legislation on national minorities, which has just been adopted in Ukrainian Parliament over today by constitutional majority of members of Ukrainian Parliament. Indeed, it's a very important legislation adopted in Ukraine. It has been prepared in a very inclusive dialogue with the national minorities, and we are grateful for Romanian minority, which has been actively engaged in the process throughout the way. But we're also grateful to the colleagues from the Romanian government who shared with Ukraine its legislation, its practices, which has become the bid and the background of the legislation adopted in Parliament. In Ukraine, we have thousands of Ukrainian children enjoying the education in the Romanian language. Now it will be a wider group of people, because Ukraine has stuck to the decision of Moldova and Romania to recognize the Moldovan language as a Romanian language. So we have agreed to work hardly on the implementation of the legislation with the new, clearly identified educational framework, access to different types and instruments of support for the national minorities. The long way ahead of us, but finally we have completed the legislative phase, which is right and clear and addressing all the best practices, including the recommendations of the Venice Commissions and the comments from the minorities itself. But it's not a secret, I guess, for anybody that the major part of our discussion was targeted to identify the steps which might be needed to be taken ahead of the meeting of the European Council, meeting of the General Affairs Council in Brussels next week. Our strong understanding that there is a clear merit-based approach. This is the basic principle of EU functioning, and it has been agreed more than a year ago, when Ukraine has been granted candidate status, that there are pending steps expected from Ukraine prior to the decision on the next steps related to accession to be taken. Ukraine has put an enormous efforts throughout the war, mobilizing all the political parties in Ukraine, all the parts of the government, administration, civil society, to make the transformations happen, to overcome the stumbling blocks and problems which deterred us a bloc from accomplishing the reforms. We made a significant progress, which has been assessed not only by European Commission, but also by Council of Europe, by Venice Commission, by Greco organization, by individual member states, and we are grateful for Romanian colleagues that you've been throughout the way with Ukraine in a very constructive dialogue, which allowed us to enable the decisions that we have today. And finally, we are at the situation when European Commission has accomplished all of this expertise and made the decision to recommend starting the accession talks for Ukraine and Moldova. And based on the merit-based approach, it's vital for us that we see that the next step is taken and the decision on accession talks is taken. This would serve as a natural decision for the process which is envisaged in the Treaty of European Union, and it would be a clear signal to all Europe and all other enlargement countries that enlargement is back and enlargement is to happen. We see literally zero reasons for EU to veto enlargement process, to veto Ukraine and Moldova accession talks. So I think that all possible efforts to mobilize the unity should be taken. And of course, Ukraine understands that it's a task to be completed by member states themselves, but rest assured that whatever is needed from Ukraine, it will be done. We are absolutely confident that we enjoy the full support of Romania and the position of standing up for the decisions which are important and historical and which are the demand of time is the feeling that I have following the discussion with you. We agreed to stay in a close touch and hope to then pave the tribute to the decisions to be taken on 15th. Thank you, Luminița.
Vă mulțumim, evenimentul s-a încheiat, o seară bună.